Well, in Dresden, which was then a country village near to the potteries, one end of the potteries.
What do you remember most about your childhood? Were they happy days?
Oh, very. I lived near fields and woods, and as a child I was especially fond of walking, always alone, and I suppose that environment has played some part in my creative work, because
was it here that you first developed your love for music?
I always had as a child, the beat of a distant drum would set my mind going. I said, or the low notes of the pedal organ in the church would set my imagination working. Have an open mind, because when one tries to make something definite, everything seems to lead to hypothesis.
You think there's no purpose to life at all?
Well, I haven't found it yet.
Isn't that a pretty gloomy thought?
No, I'm quite happy about it. No.
But with your disbelief, how do you keep so cheerful?
I have no thought of the dark side of life. Everything seems to me perfectly normal and natural.
If you had your time all over again, would you want to do anything different?
Not a bit. No, not a bit.
Well, I was working at Gladstone Pottery Museum in the 70s and met my soon-to-be husband, Terry Woolliscroft, who, as well as a volunteer at Gladstone, was also an integral part of the North Staff Symphony Orchestra. And one day he said, Paul Shaw, who plays the timpani in the orchestra, has had this idea of doing the world's largest symphony composed by a local composer, Harvergal Brian. And Trevor Stokes, who was part of the orchestra, said to Paul Shaw, in a sort of slightly non-realistic way, well, if you organise it, I'll conduct it. And really, that was what happened.
Okay, the Gothic, the world's biggest symphony, the world's largest symphony, and it was composed by this chap called Harvergal Brian. He was born in Dresden, not over there, here in Longton. He was a son of a potter, and Paul Shaw, the chap who organised the whole event, he was dedicated to getting this Gothic symphony produced in Stoke, where it was created. He got me involved. He got Pam, who eventually became my wife, involved. Paul Niblett, Kathy Niblett, who's my sister. So it's quite a family affair. Paul Shaw, together with the conductor, Trevor Stokes, and we had Keith. Keith was the treasurer. He's died now, unfortunately. And yeah, we got together and we wanted, it was like a mountain. It had to be climbed. And this performance in Stoke-on-Trent of a symphony composed in Stoke-on-Trent was the first ever complete symphony with all the forces required by the composer, even including the thunder machine. There were two performances prior to ours, but ours was the first complete one. Since then, there have been 5 other performances, and the best of those was at the Proms in 2011 at the Royal Albert Hall, and that was the best, really. our performance was a world record breaker. It was terrific. We made the Guinness Book of Records, and we were in there for a couple of decades actually, but the performance at the Royal Albert Hall just 5 years ago, they had a few more performers than us. I say a few. We had nearly 800, they had 900, so they knocked us off the top spot. So yes, Paul Shaw, the man who organised it all, he was the driving force behind it, and he got these 800 performers squeezed into the Victoria Hall and made a fantastic job of it.
One of the important things about the performance is to realise that this was all, nearly all, 99% volunteers, and there's a big tradition of volunteers in the Woolliscroft family. My husband was a volunteer at Gladstone when I was curator. His sister, Kathy Niblett, was a volunteer, and so was her husband, Paul Niblett, who's been doing it for over 40 years.
My involvement was as a stage manager, if you like. Sounds a very grand title, doesn't it? But of course, when you've got 800, 900 odd performers in the Victoria Hall in Hanley, it was a lot of thinking had to be done to figure out how on earth they'd all get seated. And that's when we decided that all the seats would have to come out of the arena area, the auditorium, and we'd fill that with musicians. That most of the balcony would be filled with choristers, and we'd try and squeeze the audience in somewhere, and we finished up with a couple of hundred in the audience. So there was the logistics of organising the hall, getting everybody in there was the first thing. But there were one or two other interesting things that went on, such as collecting the sets of timpani. There's something like 20 odd timps, big kettle drums in it. And somebody over at Leicester, I'm trying to remember the name, Premier Drums, I think they loaned them to us, and so we had to go over to Leicester to pick these things up, but we needed a van, and our dear friends at Budget Rent-A-Car, as it was in those days in Longton, loaned us a van, I think, to do the job, and we had to build a big staging in the back in order to get 10 drums on a upper story and 10 below, so they'd all stack in, and off we went to Leicester and picked up 20 kettle drums. So there was a fair bit of organisation there, and that was all done at Gladstone, as was the Thunder Machine. The Thunder Machine, of course, one of Harvergal Ryan's very special pieces of percussion. We decided we'd make one of these things, and it was like a big seesaw with big metal balls in it rolling backwards and forwards. And that was sort of on a trestle, and you, like a seesaw fashion, the balls moved up and down channels in this frame and made a good noise. It was based on the Thunder Machine, which is in the Theatre Royal down in Bristol, up in the gods there. And the balls were very kindly made on the night shift, I believe, I think I can say this now, by a friend in the pub called Mickey Poole, who was a maintenance fitter at Mefford Power Station. And I can say that now because Mefford Power Station, of course, is no more. Neither is the CGB that was running it. So Mickey Poole, if anybody out there knows anything about Mickey Poole, then he made the big cannonballs that we used in the Thunder Machine for the Gothic.
It wasn't just the Gothic, of course, it was the national anthem called God Save the King, and it was composed by Granville Bantock, a great friend of Harvergal Bryan. When we performed this with all 800 performers, including the organ at the Victoria Hall, the sound was magnificent. When it finished, it was a 10-minute version of the national anthem. When it finished, the audience were quiet for several seconds, and then there was an almighty whew. People were staggered how good it was. And then, of course, the Gothic started, and 2 hours later it all finished with rapturous applause. It was broadcast live by Radio Stoke. They didn't record it, unfortunately, but Bill Humphreys, who did the commentary, he started it all off and he finished it. It was a night to remember, and it was one of the most important cultural events in Stoke-on-Trent's history.
Enthusiastic applause there for this performance of Harvergal Brian's Symphony No. 1 in D minor, the Gothic. That the audience won't be satisfied. They've sat patiently through a very, very long evening. They've been enraptured by it all. That's the first performance of the Gothic Symphony to be given by the full forces demanded by the composer. And it was given by soprano soloist Marjorie Tapley, contralto Jean Reevely, tenor Eric Baskerfield, the bass Philip Ravenscroft. The Gothic chorus consisted of members of the Keele Chamber Choir, the Leicester Philharmonic Society, the Margaret Wareham Choir of Solihull, the Nantwich and District Choral Society, the Oriana Choir from Macclesfield, the Potteries Choral Society, and the Stone Choral Society. The children's chorus comprised of members of the Ashbourne Parish Church Boys Choir, the Goudhurst College Girls Choir, the Nantwich Parish Church Boys Choir, the Prestbury Boys Choir, and the Prestbury Girls Choir. The producer was Paul Shaw. The Stoke Gothic Symphony Orchestra was led by Raymond Badley, and the conductor was Trevor Stokes. And to all of them, our hearty congratulations as they go back again to take yet another bow to, as you can hear, a rapturous applause. Yes, indeed, it's been a historic night here at the Victoria Hall in Hanley, with Brian's Gothic Symphony coming home. A musical Everest has been climbed. Stimulating, certainly, and yet bewildering. What can we make of it all? We probably need to hear it again, but shall we ever get the chance? Who knows? With this applause ringing in your ears, I wish you from the Victoria Hall in Hanley a very good night.
Now look at this. This is the official photograph of the event. It was taken way up in the gods at the Victoria Hall, and it shows all the performers. Down on the ground floor there we've got the main orchestra. On the platform here we've got the children's choir. Behind those more children's choirs, and then 1, 2, 3, 4 brass bands. Over here there's choirs seated. Over here on the right there were choirs seated, and down in the auditorium the orchestra itself. I'm over here. That's me. I moved at the wrong time. Look at this. Everybody, you can see everybody else, but me, I moved my head. I was emptying the gravy out of my trumpet. So that was it, including the organ. That was the official photo, and well, it shows the size of the thing.
The big difference between Terry and I in part of this performance was that he was a performer, but after selling programmes on the door, I was in the audience. So we spent the time of the concert apart. And the National Anthem by Granville Bantock was one of the most amazing things I have ever heard. And some people will remember Peter Legg locally, and he was in the row in front of me. And after the performance, which still makes me feel emotional, he just let out this enormous woof. It was the most astonishing piece of music, and you never hear it because you don't often get 800 performers together. And then we were off into the symphony. After the symphony, there was a lot of chaos. When you're a volunteer, you have to clear up afterwards, as well as doing the good things before and enjoying the performance. And Terry and I met up again in the green room, which was packed, and there were speeches going on and applause. And he turned to him and he started whispering, and I thought, oh, I can't hear the speeches. I was about to say be quiet, but actually what he was doing was proposing marriage. So I agreed, and the Gothic really brought us together, and we've been together ever since.
So there we are, a record of it, the world's biggest symphony, performed at Victoria Hall in Hanley by the North Staff's Gothic Symphony Orchestra.